Good morning, everyone. How's it going? My name is Chris Chang, and thanks for joining us today. We're on Google Hangouts on Air. I'm sitting next to my great friend and esteemed colleague, Marc Weisinger.
How's it going, Chris?
Good. Can't complain.
We're live, right?
I think we're live.
Okay.
I think we're live.
Hard to tell, but we're going to assume that the folks at Google that we are live.
Perfect. So today, we're going to talk about a few different things. We really want to jump into, paid search strategies and how we can take this concept of audience personalization and segmentation within paid search.
Sure.
All right. And so this is something that we're very excited for today. And before we get started, I want to do a quick introduction to both Marc and myself. Does that sound like a good plan with you?
I think so. You want people to feel comfortable that we're going to give them good information, right?
Exactly.
You're a smart guy. I'd love to tell people more about you.
Well, I'll start with you first. How does that work?
That works.
Perfect. So Marc and I, we've known each other for a pretty long time.
Right.
I think almost 10 years now.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We've been working together actually for the last 8 years. And Marc is our director of Elite SEM Canada. He's based in Toronto.
That's right.
Originally started in our New York office. Some other fun facts about Marc. Number one, he is a soon-to-be father.
That's right.
All right. Now, are you going to share with the audience, boy or girl?
Well, so I actually know the sex. My wife doesn't, so it's kind of a secret.
Yeah.
So that's maybe a fun fact that the folks didn't know about us. So I don't think so, because I think she might be watching and she might find out. But that is true. So all those things are correct.
All right. I mean, the other good thing to know about Marc here too is he's a dog aficionado. In fact, he has a wonderful little dog by the name of Rex, who we happen to see almost every single day on our Slack channel.
Yeah,
here at Elite.
He's done great.
Yeah.
Cool. And then for you guys to know about Chris, so like Chris said, we've been working between the two of us almost 2 decades in the digital marketing industry. Chris actually came to us from AKQA and SearchRev, a bid management technology platform. And then he's worked at Elite for the last 8 years, currently being a director of client services. So Chris brings a wealth of knowledge to the table. Chris is also taken, so he's married, sorry ladies, and he's a twin. And I just recently found out was born on New Year's. So a lot of interesting stuff about Chris. And ultimately, I think we're going to have a fun time here today, give you guys some great information about paid search, how to make your AdWords campaigns better. So yeah, let's. So the main topic is topic targeting, right? So we're going to talk about how specifically layering on first-party data in AdWords campaigns can help make them better. So it's an exciting topic. Obviously, with digital search and kind of digital marketing, things change constantly. So it's our job here to give you guys some tips to use for your accounts and ultimately do the whole marketing thing better.
As we proceed through today's discussion, you're going to have the option and opportunity to type in some of your own questions that you might have during today's discussion. Feel free to do so. We love to keep this as interactive as possible, especially at the end. We want to answer those questions for you guys and help you guys along the way when you're thinking about how do you tackle and execute this concept of audience personalization within your search program itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So any questions on the topics that we go over today, anything that you want to ask Chris and I live on air that we pretty much have to answer, and you've always wanted to do that, feel free to do that. And then anything else related to anything that Elite SEM would do, like conversion rate optimization, display advertising, mobile marketing, or shopping is also fair game. So pretty much anything that you guys have is a great opportunity for us to talk about it.
Cool.
Now,
before we get started, though, today's March 3rd.
Today is March 3rd.
Right, and I think there's some significance with this date.
Yeah,
do you want to tell us a little bit about it, Marc?
I did some Googling, and it turns out there's 4 key events that happened on March 3rd throughout history. In 1634, the first bar was opened in Boston. So that's a long time ago. In 1791, the U.S. Mint actually was first created by Congress.
Really?
So they started printing some money in the U.S. In 1955, it was Elvis's first TV appearance. And then in 1993, Howard Stern first went on air, also in Boston. A lot of Boston stuff happened today. So what does that mean for our audience? Well, in terms of the first bar in Boston, we want to make this light for those folks on the East Coast a little bit later in the day. We want to make this a conversation where you guys can have a beer, feel comfortable. In terms of the Mint, this is all about making everyone more money. So how do we save money where it's not going to be efficient in digital marketing? How do we make more money? So our goal here is to make you guys more efficient. And ultimately, we think our conversation and topics and some of the data that we're going to share is going to be pretty eye-opening to do better in advertising and ultimately make more money. And then with Howard Stern and Elvis, I mean, we're going to try to make it fun. So try to be entertaining, try to not make this super boring. I'm not sure who's Elvis and who's Howard Stern, but between the two of us, hopefully we'll do a good job of doing that stuff.
I think you're forgetting the other major March 3rd announcement. Fast forward over, excuse me, to 2016. This is actually my first Google Hangout on air, but this is your third one as well, right?
Yeah, done a couple things with Google, so I've been lucky to have them have me and invite me back. So hopefully for the audience, that's some good news, and again, we'll share with you guys some great information. Right. That's a good one, Chris.
Thank you. So let's go into it. I mean, and before we get moving into kind of the audience personalization tactics, I've been on vacation for the last 2 weeks or so. I was in Costa Rica and Jamaica, and I'm just curious, was there any kind of major announcements or any kind of updates that Google has made recently during that time period?
I'm trying to think. Nothing big I can think of. Yeah, been a week. Oh wait, yeah, Google actually made a pretty big change. Now there's no more search ads on the right side of ads.
No.
Have you heard about that?
I mean, I might have seen something while I was searching, but I didn't know what was going on there. I was just curious.
No, it's a good point. So in terms of breaking news, we should probably cover that as well. So long story short, traditionally and historically, advertisers have been able to see search ads on the top left of ads above the organic results, then also on the right-hand rail. So positions 4 through 7 or 8 potentially, we're usually on the right. As of last Friday, Google has gotten rid of those right-hand ads for X amount of traffic. So, what we've heard, close to 50% of traffic. Ultimately, what we've heard about this is it's a test. So who knows what it's going to look like tomorrow. There's no real way to understand exactly how this is going to look in the future.
Right.
But it's worth noting that this did change. The first thing I'd want to say about it is now that we've been live for about a week, we actually haven't noticed anything significantly different in our results. So looking at our agency, it hasn't been as big of a change as maybe advertisers were expecting.
Okay.
Some of the things that I would say are key to understand about and keep in mind, and coming back from vacation, you might want to know about, would be, you want to look at your top of page results versus top and side now, or top and bottom, because ultimately position is maybe not as important. Position 4 now being on the left-hand side, potentially if you're above the top of results, that's what you're looking for as an advertiser to make sure you're getting traffic. You might see a slight dip in organic results potentially, but ultimately it's too early to know exactly what's going to happen, what it's going to do to the competition of CPCs or things like that. So the jury's still out, but as with everything else in digital marketing, things change a lot.
Yeah.
So you're going to want to keep up with that, make sure you haven't been impacted or seen anything. But so far, haven't really noticed too much other than it being a big industry topic that a lot of people are talking about.
It's very interesting. I think something that I think we're all going to monitor very closely as time proceeds. But I think you hit it right on the nail, which is Google's always testing different things. Google's always looking at different methodologies to improve that search experience for the end customer. And yeah, some of that affects us as marketers, but we have to play within that sandbox, and we're going to maximize the opportunity within that. Right? I think the big question is how long before Bing copies Google.
Yeah, again. I'd say if history serves us, probably between 9 and maybe 16 months, we'll see that happen. And I think the big thing is, and it's similar to the topics that we're going to discuss, there's less advertising spots that are above the fold that you see on the search page.
Right.
You want to feel confident that you should be bidding for those spots. And then that's the traffic that you want. And that goes into the first party data conversation, or really the meat of what we're going to talk about today.
Cool. Well, let's jump right into it. Part 1 of the conversation is going to be about demographics. And so, we use the terminology building your first party data audience. And we talk about there's a lot of different ways of doing that, right?
Sure.
Taking maybe your own CRM data and leveraging that. We see some other platforms doing a lot of that. Facebook's success was kind of built off of custom audience data. But Google actually has a number of very solid tools in AdWords that allows you to start really understanding who your users are, and starting to build your own first-party audience segments, right?
Sure.
Mark?
Yeah, and the first thing for the audience, for those who maybe aren't familiar, just to define first-party data. So first-party data is any data that a client, an advertiser, a brand would have about their own customers. So when we talk about CRM data, it's who are the people that are buying stuff, what are they buying, really, really, really specific information that you build in terms of your customer database. What we're going to talk about is, in addition to having your internal first-party data, how do you build that data within AdWords, right? So how do you understand, of the people that are clicking on my ads, that are coming to my site, how do we break those down and build that data in AdWords? And then how do we use that? What are the use cases for that? So when we talk about demographics, we're going to talk about, similar to adding a bid modifier for mobile or geography or device types, anything like that, how we can actually build that for age and then gender. So in Google, we're actually able to start to overlay this information. It's going to look like all your campaign data, so you can segment a campaign report, an ad group report, and then segment on top of that age or gender. And for the most part, it's been really insightful in terms of even just putting that data in there, not making any changes from a modifier perspective, put it in at 0, and then build the data in. If you don't actually go in and actively put in the modifier at 0, you don't see any data.
Oh, so that's a very important point, I think. You're basically saying, unless you have a 0% bid modifier in place, you're not going to be able to see whether it's female, whether it's male, whether the age groups are a certain group that's gravitating more towards the ad message and copy. Is that what you're suggesting right
That's
there?
right. So I'm hoping by the time our Hangout is done, that everyone in the audience is going to be really interested, look at the data and say, hey, we want to do this because look at how this could look, or look how much we could take advantage of this if we start to build this first-party data. But unless you actually add it, you won't see it. So it's similar to adding a dynamic remarketing pixel. This first day you add that, then you're starting to build your audience up. It's the same thing for layering in these audiences.
So and I think the terminology for this solution service offering within AdWords is it called demographics in search? Is that what the terminology is?
So basically, like using age or gender. Yeah. So demographics essentially.
You know, I've looked in AdWords' UI and I've seen those data points coming in. I've seen males, you know, and females, and obviously, but I also see this other group, and it's called undetermined.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about what that is and why Google has like that within the UI interface? You know, giving us as well as the audience a better understanding of how Google determines.
Yeah, and all of this data is going to be PII. Personally identifiable information. That's always a tough one to say. So it won't know that Mark is 31 years old, lives in Toronto, all those different things. It'll just basically glean that information from different user activity or things like that. So you'll always run into maybe a shared computer. You'll notice that the first age range is actually 18 to 24. So anyone that's below that isn't going to get classified. Or if Google doesn't think it can determine how old you are, it essentially won't. It'll bucket those people into undetermined. So even with age and demographic, it's worth knowing that you're not going to see 100% of your data get categorized. It'll be, you know, maybe 50% of the data or something along the lines that's going to be a lot less than the total. And that's the data that we're focusing on, because if it's undetermined, ultimately you can still see the data, but you're not really going to bid differently for that or have a campaign targeting undetermined.
That makes sense. I mean, essentially it's Google doing its own due diligence to make sure that the data that we're all looking at is as valid and as accurate, really, as possible.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting thing is, even if you have your own first-party data, which we'll talk about later, building your first-party in AdWords is interesting because that's where you're going to then bid higher or lower or have a campaign for it. So the way it looks in AdWords and the way Google categorizes it is really important because that's how you want to leverage your data. Make sense?
Yeah, so I mean, step one is just looking at that data that Google is capturing then, and then starting to build your own hypothesis and ideas around, well, what is this data telling me?
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Well, show me how this is done.
Yeah,
show me how this works out.
So I brought some white label data. It'll be, I think, pretty eye-opening in terms of what the data that we're seeing. One thing that's worth mentioning with the data, and when we're going to talk about implementing these, is being kind of cautious with your modifiers and things like that. So when we actually look at the data and we talk about what we would do with it, at that point, let's make sure we address, you know, not adding too many modifiers, being careful in terms of like how we use the data. But this is some data where we just had a 0% modifier, looked at the data, and let's see what we find. So the first example we have is an e-commerce company. They layered in the data. We start to see some pretty interesting things. The first thing I would look at when we're looking at this, and you might notice it's a little bit off-center, it's because we're going to overlay something on top of it in a minute. You'll see that the majority of traffic actually comes from the 18 to 24 range. So of 30x% of the data that's coming in for age is of this date, of this age range. And you'll actually notice that the CPCs are the cheapest there. So we're spending a lot of money and the traffic's pretty cheap. You might think, hey, that's pretty good, right?
I mean, this right here essentially tells me we need to go after, or at least for this client specifically, they should be going after 18 to 24, highest click-through rate, lowest CPC, right? I mean, that's basically what we're seeing here.
Well, the interesting thing is if you look at the click-through rate, it's actually a little bit lower, but the cost is cheaper.
Okay.
The other thing that's worth mentioning with the data is these are all from the same keyword campaigns. So this is the same term, but with people in different age ranges. So we're not looking at like different campaigns or things like that. You're talking about an exact match keyword. It's exactly the same for both of them, but just the age has been overlaid.
Okay.
So, but you do see differences in click-through rate, and ultimately you see differences in CPC also. Now, let's add in the back-end metrics.
Okay.
Let's look at conversion rate. Let's look at cart size, specifically for the same e-commerce vendor. So even though clicks were cheaper, all of a sudden you start to look at conversion rate, and you're like, wow, even though it's making up the biggest segment of our business, they actually convert way less than some of the older age ranges. And when you look at the cart size, I mean, it is so much smaller in comparison to some of the older date ranges. In terms of looking at it a different way or just kind of focusing on the totals, I put together just that one smaller vertical versus the 35 and up demographic. And I mean, AOV is 83% higher. So if someone's buying a $100 cart size normally, 83% higher for the older folks than some of that 18 to 4. And then conversion rates much, much better in the older date range. So, so the CPCs made you think one thing, hey, that's great, cheap traffic, I'm getting it cheaper for the same stuff. But ultimately, when you look at who's converting and how much their purchasing power is, it's a much different story where potentially you might want to limit how much you're spending on the 18 to 24. Or when we talk about other campaign types, let's say we want to launch a YouTube campaign, or we want to launch another non-branded campaign for something we've never done before, or upper funnel display. Maybe we don't launch it to everyone 18 to 24 because clearly they make up a large percentage of our audience. But if we're going to convert or we're going to spend money on things we're not sure if they work, if we get a conversion, we want the cart size to be really big.
Got it. Got it. So, I mean, basically, you're not even putting any modifiers in place here. You're just letting kind of this internal data that Google's capturing dictate some of the strategy as you move forward in terms of who you message to, how you bid on that person, and where you want to test out new keyword segments.
Yeah, the idea for messaging is actually really interesting because potentially by breaking out male or female, looking at your data, breaking out age ranges, if you think there's a reason that the click-through rate is lower for, let's say, a certain age range or male or female, there's no reason you couldn't change up your ad copy to actually more specifically message a female that's 35 plus, or a male that's 18 to 24.
Cool. I want to go back one step.
Okay.
I want to talk to you about what you had said earlier. You said, well, you can put this 0% bid modifier, but reality is, once you start collecting the data, you can start maybe even changing that bid modifier, right? You can increase and decrease, which is a fantastic tool. During that process, though, you also said this. You said, it's important that we only focus on making the bid modifier changes happen on one variable.
Yeah, that's right.
So are you saying that there could be a slippery slope if you were to do a bid modifier on the age and then a bid modifier on the gender all at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely right.
Okay.
So let's say we have a $10 bid, which is pretty high, but let's say we're in a competitive space. If we have an upward or downward bid for mobile, and then we know that people from Florida are more likely to convert, and then also we see that, oh, let's target the folks that are above 35, you know, a bid can get really out of control. Bid modifiers are actually multiplicative. So your $10 bid all of a sudden is $30 really quickly. So similar with any other campaign, you want to make sure that you're only testing one, maybe two things at a time. So break out a new campaign for people of this age range with a higher bid, or focus on a geography and then optimize, like have a campaign just for geography and then use the modifiers for age or demographic.
Got it. Got it. So in the demographic world within AdWords, again, there's gender, there's age. I swear I saw something else too. It's kind of hidden within AdWords, like something about household income. Is that another way for us to kind of hone in on demographics and audience segments within AdWords?
Yeah, we actually have some household income coming up a little bit later where basically the way that household income works is Google uses the census data based on zip codes. And based on whether you're in the higher or lower, I can skip to that part of the presentation. We had a client, and you were able to help me share some of this data from, you were speaking at a conference recently about personalization. And this is an example of you actually lowered the bids for people in the lower half of the lower 50% of household income. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. And I mean, the data is pretty good in terms of looking at it. So with lowering the bids, you actually got a higher click-through rate, a lower cost per conversion, and then a higher return on ad spend.
Got it.
So household income is another thing, or another way that you can actually segment your data. If we go back to the demographics, if you don't mind, I also brought a lead gen example of using, again, with the zero modifier, just looking at the age ranges and letting that data pull in. It's a pretty similar story. So, we're not going to say don't go out there and target the 18 to 34 in this instance. But you can see for this lead gen client, when it's actually for something that's a higher, even though it's lead gen, the actual business case is for something that's like a much higher purchase value.
Right.
And something that you would expect you wouldn't really be able to get into unless you're a little bit older, worked for 10 years in the industry, built up a little nest egg sort of thing. So they're actually seeing similar things. Higher conversion rates with an older demographic, higher click-through rates, lower cost per conversion. And ultimately, this is going to be different for every business. So the recommendation is setting those baselines, starting to build in the data, and then using it, right? So very much it's kind of like we're on like a cooking show right now.
Right.
And, we just put the turkey in, but this is 6 months later, or you probably don't want to cook your turkey for that long. Maybe, I think, a day, unless you have them in like those water things that I don't really know much about. So, yeah. This is the data after it's baked for a while and we've seen it.
Got it. And so essentially, we're testing our own hypothesis. We, as marketers, and even our clients, are saying, hey, we believe this is the right group, or we believe this is the right gender, or even household income. But now we're saying, well, let the data do the determination of if that's the case or not, right?
That's absolutely the truth, right? So it's all about the numbers.
Right.
For the most part, ad testing, multipliers, devices, things like that, we're all going to bring our own assumptions in terms of what's going to work better based on, how long we've worked with that company, knowing our audience, all those different things. At the end of the day, if we build up enough data to actually look at it and say, hey, it's pretty clear, this just works better, that's going to help us a lot. And the reason that I love the idea of age and gender as the first thing that we're going to cover is because you can go out there and start buying a non-branded keyword campaign or upper funnel display, or shopping. There's so many things out there that are harder than just buying your branded keywords, right? So when we talk about the ceiling of impact, if you're able to go out there into something that's got a high ceiling, so the amount of people searching for men's shoes versus a specific brand of shoes or anything like that. So to feel more comfortable to be at the top of Google in those top 3 or 4 positions, because you know that people that are a little bit older that maybe have a certain household income are more likely to convert because you've seen that. That gives you a lot more confidence to go in there, especially if you have a limited budget. Then you can go in, have some confidence, not feel like you're going to do the same thing for everyone in the general market. Because as we can see with those couple examples, the general market is going to vary completely different based on age or gender or all those other factors.
And certainly by keywords or even by campaigns, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There could be certain campaigns and keyword sets that you have that really work extremely well with one gender or one demographic group, and maybe not so much with the other.
Yeah, I love the idea about personalization. So having a specific ad, maybe even landing pages, or keeping that messaging consistently. The way I think about age and demographics, it's kind of like eating your vegetables, right? So we all know vegetables are good for us. I think that's...
I mean, to a certain degree,
sure. My mom always tells me that they are, so I'm going to believe mom on this one. So vegetables are good for us. Everyone should be eating more vegetables.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like our customers, right? If you're a brand and you have customers, anyone who buys something for you is a good person.
Sure.
They're on your team for the most part, right? We're happy with them. We feel good that they're our customers. We want to treat them well, and we value them. Ultimately, though, some customers are better than others, and some vegetables are better than others. Like, you're not going to find me eating many string beans because it's just not really for me. Spinach and broccoli are clearly the best vegetables. I don't think there's any debate, and I don't think anyone would argue with me that they're the best. So for me, those are the best. So it's similar to having a customer. The people that have a way higher cart value, sure, they're all good customers, but you're going to want to make sure that you're getting the most out of, and everyone has their favorite customer. People who buy the most stuff, I'm sure, are some brands' favorites. They like that
I think
stuff.
I know where you're going with this. And I think where you're going with this, correct me if I'm wrong, is about, well, creating buckets of who your customers are, and then determining from that, when do you message to them? How do you bid on them? And what kind of value proposition you show to them? Is that a good kind of assessment to make?
Yeah, absolutely. And because there's only so much budget that we have. Like,
Right.
you know, we're not going to pretend that everyone out there that's watching or all of our clients just have an unlimited budget so that we can test and do everything for everybody.
Sure.
Right? Like, we're trying to make money, right? It all comes back to the US Mint. So ultimately, if we're going to try and make money and we have a limited budget, if you can only spend $10,000 on a non-branded campaign or $200, wouldn't that money be better spent if you've already built up this first-party data and you know that you're more likely to convert or have a higher cart size for, you know, user X, Y, or Z that's been defined for you? So ultimately, that's where it comes down to allocating our dollars, feeling confident about what we're doing.
Makes sense. I mean, so now that I think we have a good foundational understanding of what, you know, is already in the AdWords UI, I want to kind of pivot into our next kind of topic here, still within audience personalization.
Sure.
This is something that I'm very, very keen on, and I think a lot of folks that are doing paid search right now are actually tackling this and executing this for their clients, and that's remarketing lists and search ads.
Yep.
Now, for those that are not familiar with remarketing lists and search ads and how that process and tactic works, Marc, can you kind of give them a quick rundown and breakdown on what RLSAs are?
Absolutely. And this is, I would say, people are going to be a lot more familiar with remarketing lists for search ads. They've been around for longer than some of the demographic stuff.
Right.
So you'll see more about this, and people are more comfortable with using these. Ultimately, we all know about remarketing and how it's great. If we polled the audience, you know, remarketing campaigns is probably something they're really happy with. Things are going really well for them. It's basically overlaying those same audiences and those same things that we were targeting on the display network into our search campaigns.
Okay.
So if we have a client and they're actually buying search, they're bringing people to their site, people are hitting the shopping cart, they're hitting specific categories, they're going to the last page in your lead gen funnel, you know, those are the audiences and those are the people for remarketing that we're going to target on the display network and have it work really well. So it's the same thing for search. So you basically have your search campaign,
right?
And then here at the ad group level, you could then add another audience, so target and bid, and it's only going to bid for search for people that have hit that same page or whatever compiles that audience. So someone who hit your shopping cart and then also then did a search for X. So whether that's your branded keywords and overlaying it with that or new campaigns.
Got it. So the way Google's capturing, creating that audience, it's, I'm assuming, cookie based.
Yeah, that's
right. So they're because the user come to the site, they capture them through their cookie and say, okay, well, Joe Smith, Becky Thomas, whoever it might be, falls into this group based off of where they go on the pages, right? So let's say they went to the add to cart page.
Sure.
Or let's say they went to a learn more and watch a video demo. Now we can start creating audience groups based off of where on the site they've explored.
That's right, and it's good to differentiate that it won't be Chris Chang and it won't be Marc Weisinger. It'll be the browser, right? So if my Chrome browser then goes to a website and then my wife uses it later, that specific device will be in that audience.
Okay.
So if I leave that page, but that's an audience that someone's targeting, if I go to YouTube or I go to the New York Times or I go to a blog about, you know, the Florida Gators football or basketball, right, as one does, then you'll be able to see an ad if there's AdSense on those pages. So it's worth noting that in terms of RLSAs, you could choose something that's a really small audience but super targeted.
Okay.
So if we have our, let's say, our branded search campaigns, and we're also going to overlay someone that's put something in our shopping cart within the last 10 days, it's going to be a really small audience.
Sure.
Because there's not that many people that have put something in the cart in the last 10 days, but it's super targeted. Those are maybe like some of our best consumers, or they've showed a huge propensity that they want to buy something.
Right.
On the flip side of that, we want to have a bigger ceiling. We talked about how using audience data has a really big ceiling because anyone out there is going to be bucketed, right? There's only so many people who have been to our site. So if we don't have a huge site, we're not going to have huge remarketing lists. You could also have a list for people that visited your site within the last 500 days. It's not going to be very targeted. Doesn't necessarily mean they're super likely to convert, but the list is much bigger. So you target more people on search with that.
So clarification, I think it's actually 180 days for the cookie window for users that come through.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. I actually believe the total is 550 days or 556. If you go to 550, it'll work, and 500 is kind of what we usually default to. So this is just how long a remarketing cookie lasts. When we're going to get into customer match in a little bit, those things last for about 180 days.
Right.
That's kind of the max that those will last. But if we're placing a dynamic pixel from Google on our site, it could last over 500 days. It's only going to cookie people after we placed it. So if I have a cookie that lasts 500 days and I place it today, it's only going to count today, even though it's going to last for a while.
Okay.
And then basically at the end of that segment, it'll expire from our browsers. So the reason we do that is, let's say we set up a cookie for 500 days. In a year's time, if I want to target people who have been to the site within a year, you could always go in and add smaller audiences,
Sure.
but you can never go in and like retroactively add something.
So let's talk about these audience groups within remarketing lists. I mean, it sounds like RLSAs, remarketing lists
Sure.
and search ads. It sounds like we are able to create these into different groups. Some of the things I'm thinking off the top of my head, just with a better understanding of RLSAs
Sure.
now, is people that have visited but have not converted. That's certainly one group you would
Absolutely.
want to create a group around. People that have converted,
Yeah.
right? You would want to create them into a certain group as
Yeah,
well,
that's right.
especially based off of what they've purchased and maybe what their AOV, their bucket size was as well.
Sure.
People that are just browsers, so people that have come through and literally are just window shopping, right?
Yeah.
Maybe clicking on the price comparison, or maybe even clicking on store location.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a good one.
So these are all different ways you want to break these audience segments out. Now, once you have this broken out, well, what do you do from there?
Yeah, so anything that you can create an audience for, you would basically go into AdWords Editor, go into the ad group column or section of it, and then you go into audiences, and then you add, I would actually default, similar to adding a demographic or age, I would put as many audiences as you think makes sense into the groups. So maybe you're adding 4 audiences, right? If you liked all those ideas that you just had, you layer them on top of all of your search campaigns.
Okay.
Same thing though with the 0% bid modifier. So the first goal, or what we're talking about here, is not actually making any changes. We're still collecting data. So that's kind of a theme of what we're talking about. Use your own data. Let your own first-party data build up. So you put in that 0% modifier. You bake it, right? So we're making turkey again. In a couple months, or whenever you have enough sizable data, you look at it, see how it's performing, and then decide to make some adjustments. I actually have some data where we just overlaid it. We didn't make any changes.
Okay.
And this is a lead gen client. You'll see for non-branded keywords, so the harder stuff, our click-through rate was almost 200% better. Conversion rates were about 300% better, and the cost per conversion is 70% lower. So already you can see that people who are familiar with our brand because they've been to the site were more likely to convert, and also were much lower cost per conversion. Again, it's worth noting that it's only going to be as big as our list, though.
Okay.
So if it's not something that you can target all users with this, but for people that have been to your site, it's going to make it a lot more efficient.
So it goes back to that same theme, which is let the data collect, and make a decision later off of that. One of the things that you can do from there, and what I think we've seen a lot of our own team members conduct recently, is, okay, well, once they have that insights, is then creating separate search-specific campaigns specifically honed in on that audience segment.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, this is something you could overlay and bid more or less for, or you can actually have a separate campaign for.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
So it works really well. It's a no-brainer. Again, the ceiling is going to only be as high as the list. The more targeted the list, the lower the ceiling.
Right.
But ultimately, the better the data will be. So overlay all the ones that make sense. It's at this point where I know we've talked about a lot of stuff.
Sure.
So I think as a reminder to the audience, if you guys are still awake and out there hopefully enjoying it, we do want you guys to ask questions. So we have a good 5-10 more minutes worth of data, worth of more topics to talk about. But we have a lot of time to actually go in, talk to you guys as advertisers, and to answer questions about these topics. So we're hoping that you guys have some great questions for us. As a treat, if you guys are still awake, here's a couple pictures of my dog, Rex. So that's nice. Hopefully you guys like that. He's a good boy.
How old is your dog, by the way, Mark?
He's about 9 months old.
9 months out.
Yeah, he's 9 months old.
Cool.
All right, so Chris, I know you're going to be excited about this. So this is what I would call it's almost like the most hypercharged, the most first party you can get on AdWords, and this is Customer Match. Right. So you heard a little bit about Customer Match?
I have. I mean, it's definitely something that's piqued my curiosity.
Sure.
Especially recently. But walk us through how Google is doing Customer Match, and what that means for Google, and how it's being deployed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited because I know that you're bringing some really good tips to the table about this for how to make your Customer Match better in Google. So I think that's really useful information and things that I haven't heard from a lot of other people. So I think our audience will find that really useful. So the way I think about Customer Match, it's your internal CRM data. So any internal data that you have about your customers, actually taking email addresses based on the different segmentation that you have in CRM, similar to email, and then importing those as a list to then use in AdWords for a certain set of specific campaign types. So the way I think about it is I think about the swamp in Gainesville, right? So if you looked at a nice aerial shot of the University of Florida field and the football stadium for a Sunday, I mean, you got 98,000. It's close to 100. We're not at 100 yet, I don't think. People that are just crazy about the Gators, cheering their team on.
Sure.
Ultimately, they're not all the same fans. So sure, they all like the Gators, just like your customers all have bought something for you. But I mean, there are people there that maybe it's their first game, or they go to every home game, or they always buy a new jersey at the start of the season, or they always get a Gatorade and a hot dog, right? Your customers are very, very different. So the same way in email segmentation, or we talked about how remarketing was people who went to a specific page. This is all of the robust customer data, like all of the first-party data that you have in your internal system, and then using this in AdWords. So even though these are all Gator fans, they're not necessarily all the same. They have different tendencies, similar to age or demographic or household income. Ultimately, there's a lot more data in there that we can then use with AdWords.
Basically, what I think I'm getting from this is, let's say all these Gary Gator fans, right? They all love the Gators, but they have different tendencies, different wants and needs.
Yeah.
Likely, though, they might make all the same searches.
Yeah, so again, it's not necessarily that their searching behavior is different, but how we want to treat them, or how we want to target them, or what ads we want to show, or if we want to target them at all.
Yeah, so now you're getting into real true personalization, where you're saying the keyword, in the past might have been, what dictated the ad copy and certain the landing page. But now we're saying, forget that. If we have our own first-party data and we're able to create audience segments off of that, let's determine the landing page, that ad copy, and even the value proposition based off of not just a query, but who that individual is.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning. So in terms of customer match, there is a ceiling to it as well. It's going to be how many people you have their emails for, and then also the matching of that. So the match rate, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the only place that you're using customer match right now is on YouTube, in Gmail sponsored promotions, and then also as remarketing list for search ads. As a quick anecdote, we did a little bit of customer match for the top customers of an e-commerce company. And we were able to take something like Gmail or GSPs and have over a 500% return on ad spend for that. It's an interesting ad format. You're getting in front of people on their Gmail. The paid event is them opening up an interstitial and not even coming to the website. It's still a great campaign for engagements, but to see a 500% return on that is pretty unheard of. So ultimately able to take something that's more of an engagement driver and add that as an additional targeting segment that we then use.
It's funny you said that, because I've heard that also from some of our other team members on how they're deploying both customer match, but then testing out new ad formats. I think sometimes a running joke that we hear a lot about is, Google's going to pitch YouTube or Google's going to pitch GSP. And both are valuable platforms and tactics to deploy. The question, though, is who to deploy it to. And I think this is the first ability for us to really test it on a sizable market. Again, if your match rate or your audience group is large enough, but testing it in the most effective way possible. You're not just spreading it thin and saying, anyone can be in this group. You're focusing on a very tailored audience segment.
Yeah, and I'd like you to touch on the different tips you had for people to make your match rate better.
Sure.
So I know some of the data that you shared at the conference you spoke at was that the match rate for Google and customer match is some of the best in the industry, right?
Right. So the match rates that we're seeing, that I think Google's seeing right now, is probably the strongest when you think about all the different ad networks and platforms that are out there. And I think a large part of this is because, Google owns Gmail. And so that definitely helps the match rate considerably. But some of the studies I've shown, and I was talking to some other folks while at the conference, they were saying that on Facebook, they were seeing about a 30 to 36% match rate. On Twitter, they were seeing like sub 10%.
Wow.
But on Google, on AdWords with their customer match, once they uploaded in, they were seeing as close to like 50% on the match rate. So that's actually really, really strong and really, really effective. And there's some different ways of actually testing out and seeing, what audience are going to match the best. Well, certainly Gmail is a no-brainer, right? Like if Gmail aliases, that's going to have a strong match rate. So maybe one thing as marketers should think about testing when you're uploading your customer match list is segmenting it out by what email domains they're coming from. Right? So like if it's like a Yahoo or even like, let's say a Hotmail.
I still have my AOL email.
AOL email address. uploading those in one group and seeing what that match rate looks like,
Okay.
and segmenting that out from your traditional Gmail groups, right?
Yeah.
So that's a good way to understand like the reach and effectiveness.
Well, and I think earlier you were telling me about campaigns to actually drive active
Yes.
email addresses, because a lot of people, when they're buying stuff, won't use active emails
Yeah.
or cleaning emails up, I believe.
Yeah, so great point.
Thanks.
The first one is like, well, how do you entice the users, your customers, to give you appropriate email addresses?
Sure.
And that one's such a critical thing for us to think about. You know, contests, sweepstakes, things that really kind of incentivize your customer to really provide the valid information is critical. That helps with the match rate. The other thing that also helps with match rates is cleaning up your email addresses,
Okay.
right? Plus signs, you know, periods. Those can actually hurt your match rate.
Okay.
So removing those. I mean, a perfect example of this is like so. You know, Gary plus, you know, Gators at gmail.com. Now,
Sure.
if you got rid of the plus Gators, you're going to
Yeah.
get the true effective email address. You're going to get Gary at gmail.com,
Oh, okay.
right? So now you're really focusing in on who that user is, on the right user, as opposed to having kind of like a vanity email associated, and then that would ultimately help the match rate itself.
Okay.
too.
Yeah, I might have some questions for that offline.
Sure.
To get all of that. I think ultimately, in terms of RLSA and customer match, and again, we have a lot of good time for questions, so I'm excited about that. We want to show like all the different use cases,
Yeah.
right? So some of the use cases are using new keywords, right? So I think when you think about like, are we going to go out and buy the term Valentine's Day gift,
Right.
or holiday shopping, or a gift for him, or even just the word gift,
Sure.
or sneaker? We don't normally think about going after those terms, right? That's for the Amazons and the Zappos of the world, eBay potentially. But a smaller e-commerce company is probably not going to go after that.
Sure.
With customer match or with RLSAs, to actually go out and have a higher ceiling for non-branded terms, all of a sudden you should feel a lot more comfortable about doing. You brought up personalizing ad copy.
Right.
You can even do landing pages too, right? So we know this user has bought in X, Y, or Z types of accessories, more so than they buy dresses. Let's serve them this type of ad and take them to this page. You can even do some conversion rate optimization on pages like that to see which audiences do better.
I mean, one perfect example of this
Sure.
about the personalization is, at Elite, we work with a lot of subscription-based clients,
Yep.
right? And
Yeah.
so let's hypothetically say that they have a list of all of subscribers who potentially have, unsubscribed,
Yeah.
right, from that service offering. Well, they're still making relevant searches for similar offerings that, let's say, our client has.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the best thing to do is give them a strong value proposition that's only unique to them, that only they can see, to entice them to come back. When we've done that, we've actually seen a lift in actually re-engagement, essentially,
Gotcha.
a lift and actually in lead volume.
Yeah, you're
from that.
seeing more and more subscriber-based services. So someone
Yeah.
who was interested in a product enough so that they signed up,
Yeah.
they drop off, potentially re-engaging with those customers, retaining or helping your retainment of people that have left.
Exactly. And sorry, before we go on to the other two use cases, which I
Sure.
think are very important we talk about,
Okay.
I do want to also hone in on the biggest difference between RLSAs and customer match.
Okay.
Do you know what it is, Mark?
What it is? Well, one of them, they've been to a section of your site. So let's say,
Who's they has been to a set.
so like we were talking about before, a browser.
Okay.
So maybe they bought something or they
Okay.
put something in the shopping cart. Unless you have all that audience data in your URLs, you might not know exactly what they bought.
Sure.
Or things like that, or how many times they bought over the X amount of time. Where with the CRM data, we have all that information.
Yeah, so you're going down the right path.
Okay,
let's put it that way. I think the biggest difference between the two, right, is for remarketing lists and search ads, in order to create that audience segment, they had to have visited your page.
Yeah, absolutely.
Customer match.
They
you
wouldn't
see?
necessarily have to be on the site.
Customer match, the user doesn't have to necessarily been on the site. It's your own email addresses. It's your own first-party data, right? And this is very, very important because as we think about what is happening in digital advertising right now, we're hearing a lot more about privacy, about browsing without having cookies available, right? This is going to mobile, exactly.
So
the FTC was just talking about, like,
so
privacy
your
concerns.
customer match will get all devices because you're logged into Gmail and all that fun stuff.
Exactly.
All right, let's touch on the last two things. We promised the folks Q&A, so let's save 15 minutes for it. In addition to customer match, we talk about bidding. So obviously bidding up or down based on the data and what we build up. And then ultimately, maybe we don't buy things. So if someone for lead gen has signed up for our email list, and that's what we're trying to drive people to do. Once they've done it, all right, we don't want to spend $1 on them. Let's actually exclude them. You can use them as negative audiences the same way that we do for remarketing, right? You bought something, let's turn you off.
And that makes a lot of sense, because I think a lot of the folks on today's Hangout probably get this question a lot from their CMO or even their client. And it's this: why are we buying brand? Where is it effective? I don't think it's valuable.
Sure.
And I think both RLSAs and customer match allows us to really hone in and kind of show the value that brand ads can have, right?
Absolutely.
When you're only utilizing it in the most appropriate and effective manner possible.
And I like to think about the budget example again. We don't have an unlimited budget, so if we don't, let's try to save some money in areas where we've already gotten their information, we're good, they've bought something, or they signed up. So quick recap, and then right into Q&A. So we'll grab that computer and we'll get the questions. So in terms of a recap, most important thing we talked about: spinach, broccoli, best vegetables, no question about it. Campaigns and audience data, we want to build these in, 0% modifiers. Age and gender, remarketing list for search ads, any audiences we think are applicable. Household income, Chris likes, I agree, data looks pretty good. RLSA and customer match, these are to maximize efficiency. They'll have a lower ceiling than some of the other stuff, but this is next level personalization. So we want to do that as well and test that. And then things change a lot, right? So audience and demographic were things that have been going on in digital marketing and marketing in general for a long time. In terms of AdWords, it's still pretty new. And segmenting for success. So whether it's mobile, geography, device type, age, gender, segment, if you have the resources to do it, to bid or budget effectively for that stuff, you'll get the highest ROI. All right, Chris, we got questions?
Yeah, we do. And sorry, I was looking down. I'm trying to figure out all the questions that have come in.
This is question time. All right, pick some good ones.
So I think Mike Friedman has a great question here.
Okay.
Customer match versus RLSAs.
Sure.
Any difference in terms of creative and how often to refresh?
Okay. So in terms of creative and how often to refresh, I mean, I think it's pretty much the same reasoning behind both. You would think with customer match, you'd have some more robust data about their behavior, where with RLSA, if they've, let's say, been to a certain, let's say, type of page, so like they go to the sneakers page, doesn't necessarily mean they bought sneakers. So I would almost tend to be a little bit more general with my RLSA ads and creatives, where for customer match, I would focus to not be creepy, but be more specific, because you have more robust information, you know it's accurate. So that would be my 2 cents there, is like I would almost feel more confident in the customer match data. So that's a good question.
Cool. Next one I have here is and I think this is a very important one, especially when we think about like data research and understanding your users. The question was, why do I have to enter a value at all for bid modifiers? Like what?
To see the data?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, it is what it is. So we have to do it or else we don't see the data. So it's a great question. I couldn't tell you why, but we have to do it. And you want to do it because, again, you want to see it. It's very, very minimalistic. It's very easy. It's quick to do. So just do it for all your groups. Go ahead and do it. And then, yeah, I would really advise the 0%. Because let's see how it does and then make the changes.
Right.
If you really feel a certain way about it, then you can go in and do it. You'll still see the data, but at least go 0%, see the data, see what it looks like.
Okay. Another question for you. You ready?
Okay. Yeah.
All right. We'll keep it going here.
Yeah.
How often should keyword bids amount change?
So how often should you change your bids?
Like, what's the frequency? Do you have a recommendation there?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the right answer, and it's from teaching at NYU for 5 years about digital marketing. This is 90% of the time the right answer is it depends, and then 5% it's mobile, and then the other 5% probably varies in terms of what the answer is. It depends. So if you have a ton of keyword data, and within 3 days you get 300,000 keyword clicks, and you're seeing data, yeah, go ahead and make a change and see how it does. For the most part, you want to give things time to settle in. So if I'm going to make a change on a big keyword that I get a lot of traffic of, I'd like to see how that does for 4 days, a week, 2 weeks, and then see how it is. It's also worth noting that because day of click, the way that attribution happens with conversions, you want to give things time where someone might actually open something, go away, and convert. You also want to look at cross-device conversions. So more and more and more these days, we're seeing that people are actually searching or interacting with a paid campaign on one device. So they're at their work computer, they do a search for a pair of shoes, they click on our ad. they'll buy it on their tablet or their home computer 7 days later, and we'll see that in cross-device conversions. So you want to factor that stuff in there. If you only let it run for a day and then decide to make another change, you're not letting enough data build up, and you're maybe not getting a good read on it. So letting that time window play less of a factor, and then having enough data where you feel comfortable making changes.
Okay. Got another one for you here.
Okay.
I think this is a very important one for us, especially for anyone of any experience level. We mentioned the term overlaying a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And I think that terminology probably needs a little bit more of a definition associated with it, right?
Okay.
What do we mean? Mark, can you explain to everyone what we mean when we say overlaying? Overlaying, audience segments, overlaying this bid modifier. What does that mean for advertisers?
Basically, and the way to think about it is, so we're talking about the first party, and it's a fun first party. We like our first party. First parties are nice. It's one of the best parties. So overlaying is just seeing the data. So when I pull a report, whether that's a campaign report, or that's a keyword report, or it's an ad report, to be able to actually have different things that mostly come up in Excel that I can then do a pivot table around. So I know that's a lot of words there, but in terms of technically, that's how we do it. So I want to be able to, and it's always important to look at the apples to apples comparison. So if I'm going to look at how does age do, or how does gender, or how did a remarketing list for search ad do, I'm going to look at all branded campaigns, or all branded exact match campaigns, or all non-branded campaigns, and see how those things do. So that's what I mean. I'm going to download a campaign report because I want to see how the non-branded campaigns we did for shoes worked last month. And then in addition to that, each line is going to say how they did for that campaign, but with 18 to 24 or with 65 plus. I'm going to do a pivot table, say, okay, for all of non-branded or all of what I'm making an apples to apples comparison, how did those different types or audience segments do? And that's how we'll look at it like we did previously.
Right.
So it's just being able to, on top of the fact that this is non-branded, because again, we want to make the apples to apples comparison, how did this stuff do? You want to be careful. Don't look like, if I just looked at my whole account and I said, all right, how's 18 to 24 do? If we get more 18 to 24 branded than we do than any other age range, if we look at the whole account, it's going to make 18 to 24 look really great. But ultimately, that's not a good comparison. It's just great because you're getting more branded traffic, or one of them gets more desktop traffic. It's getting very complex in terms of all the different things to overlay, but you have to factor in device type. You have to factor in cross-device, and then now we're asking you to factor more things. But ultimately, the more you segment and understand, the better you can leverage that data and the better you'll do.
Cool. I'm going to let you take a break, and I'm going to answer some of these questions that are coming in here.
I want to see some.
Here, you can check it out here as well. This one is one of my favorite ones. The question was, audience lists and how do you build those? Is it better to build them through AdWords? Is it better to build them through Google Analytics? And so for those that are newer to custom audience groups and creating RLSA segments, there are different ways of creating those groups, right? One of those techniques is actually leveraging your GA data or your Google Analytics data to create your audience segments. And this one's a very important one, right? Because there's actually a lot of powerful information that Google Analytics can capture. That maybe your traditional smart pixel that you have in place does not capture. Or maybe information that you have of your own first-party data from your CRM list that you're uploading for customer match might not be able to capture as well. And some of that includes like average duration, right? Time on site. How long have they been on site, right? How many pages how many different pages they visited, right? In fact, if you were to go to talk to our Google reps directly, most of them will tell you that the future of kind of audience personalization and creating those segments for RLSAs should be done through analytics, as opposed to just through the smart pixel.
I like the idea. I mean, anything that you can measure in Google Analytics, and ultimately, like when you're bringing in data from an analytics platform that's able to see last click or see all the different paths. I mean, think about the path to conversion report. So people that have been to the site on multiple devices or from multiple channels, they're like your most highly engaged customers. So I think it's tough because it talks about getting like a user ID. Because people are engaging with our sites and our brands on Xbox, right? Like they're searching on all these different devices these days. So they're seeing our brand in all these different places. They have all these devices. If you're able to then tie that information together in analytics, that's another thing that you can't necessarily do with a remarketing pixel, but you can do it with customer match, right? So I think I agree with you. I like the idea of time on site. And I like the idea of people that view multiple pages and things like that. I would say those are two of my favorites from analytics. And then ultimately, I don't think there's a bad way to target or have an audience.
Sure.
Whatever makes sense for your business. To me, if people that stay on my site for 8 minutes or 2 minutes kind of net out the same, like they don't convert more or less,
Right.
then it's not that big of a deal to me. But if you overlay the data, like we're talking about with our RLSAs, you can see if there's a difference in search, right? You can see if they convert better.
Absolutely.
So I think it comes back to, strategically think about how do we want to capture people, what makes sense to us, overlay it, and then let the data sort of speak for itself.
That makes sense.
All right, we got a couple more.
Which ones do you want to hit?
I think
Thanks for all the questions, guys.
Thank
We really
you.
appreciate it.
Yeah, I was hoping for more personal questions. There's a couple personal ones, like what do I think about Donald Trump and things like that. We can talk about that off air. So I know you. We can talk more about it. So, two, what do we think of the future of audience? Oh, we got a bump for one. All right, what do we think about the future of audience targeting with search? How far would it go? I think honestly, the killer app for things like customer match would be to just let us run that on the display network with remarketing. So here's your customer match audience. Whenever they go to YouTube, you can serve an ad to them. I think the problem is it's potentially going to be too creepy. Like people wouldn't treat that the right way. So I think that's something where I would be careful of. But if that gets rolled out to advertisers, I mean, we're going to have a field day with that, because the GDN, and I've done webinars with Google about the GDN. We love the GDN and Elite. It's huge. Like the reach and frequency of the GDN is massive. To overlay customer match with that, I mean, that's a no-brainer.
Before you answer the question that just got bumped up,
that's Donald Trump question.
No, not that question.
Okay.
We're going to talk about this one right here.
Okay.
Right, about how do you execute campaigns when budgets and even CPCs are a little tight.
Okay.
I want to continue on this about the future of audience targeting within search.
Okay.
I want to be a little more bold than you.
Okay.
I'm going to say this. I think that paid search is going to be all about audience personalization. Like that's without personalization of your ad messaging, of your bids, of your landing page experience, you're not going to, if you don't do that, you're just not going to succeed in the next year and year and a half. And the reason for this is because I think as we think about our audiences and as we think about the next generation of buyers, they're so immune to advertisements. They're so immune to seeing kind of digital ads everywhere. So you have to personalize that experience for them. You have to make sure that you're speaking directly to them, where they are during their purchase behavior or during their consideration process, and make sure that it resonates with them. If you don't, they're going to be immune to it. They're going to ignore it. And so I do think that the future of paid search is all about audience personalization.
Okay, you ready for the quick hitters?
Yeah.
We got 3 or 4 minutes left. All right, so we got a couple ones from people I know. So thanks everyone for joining. We appreciate it. Thanks so much, Google, for having us. So let's do some quick hitters. You ready?
Sure.
All right, this is going to be the lightning round. So have we had any luck with income segmentation with luxury clients? So we showed you that one example. We've definitely seen it work. So it's one of those things that I would start to test with. Let your own data speak. But I think for the most part, it's the same thing we saw with the 18 to 24. I don't think there's many brands. I mean, it depends on your use case and your brand. Everything's going to be different. It depends. But for sure, even trying to do those lower modifiers or a higher modifier, I think it's something you should test and see how it works for you.
Right.
So a question about have we, in terms of layering remarketing lists for search, is it best practice to break out campaigns after significance, or should we just tailor ads to different audiences? I would say for the most part, yeah, we'll tackle that one too. For the most part, I always start without breaking out campaigns. I always start with keeping my current system going and just having the overlay.
Got it.
If we feel like we have enough data, and especially the more that budget is a factor, the more and more I want to have my own campaign for something. Because where are budgets at? Campaign level, right? You knew that. So budgets are set at the campaign level. If it's not a separate campaign, we can't budget more for it. So even if it's more efficient, I can't control how much we're actually spending there. So that's what I would do first. Focus on ads, I would say, if they're in their own campaign. I would say that would be something where we have enough critical mass. Let's separate it out and do it. And then we got a quick question about nonprofits who receive Google grant money. And I work with a nonprofit for Bretto. We get Google grant money too. It's a great cause and organization. Some of our folks were actually just doing some stuff with there. Yeah. So if they have a bid limit and it's below the top 4, what can we do? So it's basically free money from Google. There's not much we can do other than bidding to the limit. It's only on search. So my recommendation is to try and spend as much of that grant money as possible. Go higher in the funnel for more non-branded keywords that you think you can get traffic for. And ultimately just do your best. There's not as much we can do there. Chris, I think, yeah, I thought you did great for
thank you.
for your first
Appreciate
hangout.
that.
We had a
Newbie.
I had a great time doing it. I hope you did too. Thank you guys so much. Thank Google again. If you guys have any more questions or we didn't get to it, please contact us at Elite SEM.
Yeah.
Chris and I enjoyed doing this. This was tons of fun for us. This is just basically like another day in the office for us, just talking about search marketing.
Clearly, just another day in the office. No.
That's right. So yeah, everyone have a great rest of your day. And then any more questions, please reach out. And hopefully we'll do this again sometime soon.
Thanks, guys.